The storm had been building since noon. By 1700 hours, it had swallowed the mountains whole. Outpost, Keller sat in the throat of a narrow pass in the Korengal-adjacent highlands, a cluster of prefab shelters, sandbag walls, and half-frozen communications equipment perched on a ridge that had no business having anyone alive on it. The kind of place that appeared on no official map because the men who placed it there preferred it that way. The cold came in layers. First, the wind. Then the ice crystals inside the wind. Then, something deeper and more patient than either, the kind of cold that didn't rush, that simply waited while it worked its way through every seam and zipper and gap until it was sitting right against your skin, telling you quietly that it had more time than you did. The interior of the main shelter smelled like diesel, wet wool, and instant coffee that had been forgotten on a burner for too long. 7 soldiers, 1 mechanic. Staff Sergeant Derek Holloway sat across the folding table from Corporal James Fitch, neither of them speaking, both of them watching the weather screen flicker and die for the 3rd time in an hour. On the other side of the shelter, Private First Class Owen Briggs was cleaning his sidearm with the particular focus of someone trying very hard not to think about anything. Sergeant First Class Todd Reamer leaned against the wall near the door, arms folded, watching the window. Lieutenant Aaron Stokes stood at the map table with a red marker he had not yet uncapped, staring at contour lines that told him nothing useful. In the far corner, barely visible under the work light she had dragged to the side wall, Maya Carter was on her knees with a disassembled M240 spread out on a drop cloth in front of her. She had been there for 2 hours. She had not said a word. Her hands moved through the components the way a pianist's hands move through a passage they have played 1,000 times, not with thought, exactly, but with a knowledge that lived below thought. The bolt carrier group, the feed tray cover, the buffer assembly. Each piece lifted, examined in the pale work light, set aside or returned. Her fingers were black to the second knuckle with a mixture of CLP solvent and old carbon fouling. There was a streak of it across her left forearm where she had pushed her sleeve up. The mechanics of other people's weapons had lived in her hands for so long that the oil had stopped washing out entirely. Fitch glanced over at her, then back at Holloway. "We've got a whiteout in 90 minutes, he said, just loud enough. "I know," Holloway said. "And she's still playing with that thing." Holloway didn't answer. Fitch turned the rest of the way in his chair. "Carter," he said it the way you'd say a word in a language you didn't speak, with no real expectation of a response. "You're aware there's a storm coming, right? Not the kind of storm you fix with a wrench." Maya did not look up. She rotated the bolt carrier group twice, examining the gas key, then set it precisely back into position on the drop cloth. "Right," Fitch said, and turned back around. Lieutenant Stokes finally uncapped his marker and drew a single line on the map that he immediately regretted and crossed out. He looked at Reamer. "What's the latest from Scout Team 2? "Radio's been intermittent since 1400, Reamer said. "Last clear transmission was 60 minutes ago. They were at the lower ridgeline." Reamer paused. "Movement. Eastern approach." The shelter got quieter without anyone deciding to make it quieter. Briggs set his sidearm down very carefully. "How much movement?" Stokes asked. They said significant. Reamer's jaw tightened. That was the word. Significant. Holloway leaned back in his chair and looked at the ceiling. "That's a nice word, isn't it?" Fitch turned to look at Maya again. She hadn't reacted at all. She was now reassembling the feed tray cover with the quiet efficiency of someone installing a light switch. Fitch watched her for a moment, and something between contempt and bewilderment moved across his face. "You ever been in a firefight?" he asked her. She didn't look up. "No, didn't think so." He turned back to Holloway. "Why do we even have a mechanic up here? Weapons tech. What's the purpose when we can't even get resupply?" "She keeps our gear running," Holloway said. "In a garage." "Sure. Out here." "Fitch, I'm just saying. She doesn't belong up here." Maya finished the assembly. She ran a function check, bolt to the rear, bolt forward, safety check, trigger pull on safe, trigger pull on fire, and set the weapon down. Then she reached for the next one. A badly frozen M4 that Briggs had left beside her workstation without asking, just left it there in the faith that it would come back fixed. She did not look at Fitch, did not answer him. Just picked up the frozen carbine and started to work. Outside, the wind shifted. A different kind of sound came with it, Not the chaotic percussion of a gusting storm, but something steadier, lower, more deliberate. Reamer turned from the window. "Get the sergeant major on the radio," he said quietly. The radio gave them 12 seconds of clarity. 12 seconds in which Scout Team 2's voice, Specialist Grant Caldwell, 22 years old, from a town in Western Ohio that nobody outside Western Ohio had ever heard of, came through clean and level and said exactly what he had to say. 40 plus armed, moving in from the eastern draw. Their spread wide flanking pattern. Whoever's leading them knows the terrain. A pause, brief and full. They're going to be at the upper approach in 40 minutes, maybe 30. Over. Then the static returned, permanent and absolute. Lieutenant Stokes capped his marker. 40, Briggs said, and it was not a question. 40 plus. Reamer moved to the map. If they come through the draw and up the main approach, they'll be in the pass. He traced the contour with his finger. This section here, 200 meters of compressed terrain, rock walls on both sides. No lateral movement, single file or close to it. Kill zone, Holloway said. It's a kill zone, Reamer agreed, for both sides. Stokes looked at the 7 of them. Counted. We have 4 operational rifles, 2 SAWs, and the 240 Carter just put back together, against 40 combat-experienced enemy in a whiteout. He said it evenly, without drama, the way someone reads a weather report for conditions they are already standing in. We cannot hold the outer perimeter. Fall back into the shelter and defend in place? Fitch asked. We do that and we're surrounded before dawn. In this weather, we won't last the night. Silence. Outside, the storm intensified. The walls shook with a gust that came and went and left a deeper quiet in its wake. Fitch pulled his gloves on, checked the magazine in his rifle. We need to get into that pass before they do. Control the choke point. 7 against 40, Briggs said. It's the only ground that works for us. 7 against 40. Fitch. So what? We sit here and... Quiet. Stokes held up a hand. The sound that stopped him was barely a sound at all. It was the specific and familiar click of a weapon being seated into battery. Everyone in the shelter knew it without thinking. Functional and final. They looked at Maya. She had finished with the M4 and set it beside the M240. Both weapons lay on the drop cloth, assembled and ready, bolt carriers forward, feed trays locked. She was wiping her hands on the rag she kept in her back pocket, the same rag that had been there since day one, stiff with layered oil, never really clean. She was looking at the map, not at them, at the map. Her eyes moved across the contour lines with an expression that was difficult to read. Not quite calculation, not quite recognition, something older than both. Stokes followed her gaze. Carter. The draw, she said. Everyone turned. Her voice was quiet. She did not raise it, did not perform the statement. Just set it into the room the way you'd say the answer to an arithmetic problem. If they funnel into the draw and come up through the choke point, they lose their flanking advantage. They compress. They lose sight lines. They lose coordination. She did not move from her corner. The draw is the most dangerous place on this map for whoever is in it. Fitch stared at her. That's exactly what Sergeant Reamer just said, that it was a kill zone. For both sides, she said. Yes. She looked at Reamer. How many thermal units do they have? Reamer blinked. Scout estimated 2, maybe 3 handheld units. Why? She looked back at the map. Said nothing for a moment. Then, who still has ammunition? At 1,748 hours, they probed the eastern perimeter. 2 shots. Suppressed. Subsonic. Corporal Tanner Webb, the team's designated marksman, the best shooter any of them had seen outside of a formal range, was at the eastern window with his SR-25 when the first round came through the shutter and took him in the shoulder, spinning him back against the wall. He was down before anyone had processed the sound, or rather, the absence of sound. Suppressed. No crack, no echo, just the shutter splintering and Webb on the floor, making a sound between a word and a breath. The second round took out the radio amplifier. Permanent silence. Stokes crossed the shelter in 3 steps, knelt beside Webb, assessed. Shoulder wound, through and through. No arterial involvement, but serious blood loss starting. He looked up at Reamer with an expression that closed a door. They have eyes on the building, Reamer said. High ground. Eastern slope. In this weather? Fitch was at the wall, below the window, back flat against the concrete block. They have a thermal scope up there. At least one. Holloway moved to the M240 on the drop cloth. He picked it up, checked the feed, and moved toward the window. Fitch grabbed his arm. You go to that window. You're dead. I know. He shook free. He got one burst out. 12 rounds, short controlled burst, angled upward toward the ridge. Then the return fire came, not suppressed this time. Multiple rifles, a pattern of impacts across the wall that walked toward the window, and the window shattered, and Holloway was on the floor, bleeding from glass across his face and forearm. Not fatal, but done for the night. Machine gun nest is gone, Fitch said, very calm, very flat. Maya crossed the room. She knelt beside Holloway, looked at the lacerations, determined they were not life-threatening, pressed a field dressing into his hand and closed his fingers around it. Then she stood and picked up the M240 from where it had fallen. She checked the feed tray, the round in the chamber, the gas setting. Don't, Fitch said. He was staring at her. Don't even think about it. That weapon requires. I know what it requires. She said it without heat. She carried it back to her corner. Fitch turned to Stokes. Sir, she's a weapons technician. She fixes them. She is not trained. Corporal Fitch. Stokes's voice was not loud. Unless you have a better option to present in the next 30 seconds, I suggest you start counting your ammunition. Fitch opened his mouth, closed it, turned away. Briggs was kneeling beside Webb, applying pressure to the shoulder wound. Webb was conscious, jaw set, breathing deliberately. I'm good, he said, to nobody in particular. I'm good. Outside, the storm had achieved whiteout conditions. Visibility, 0. Temperature, falling. 40 men moving through the dark. Maya sat in her corner with the M240 across her knees and looked at nothing. In her right hand, she was still holding the oil rag. Private First Class Nathan Garza had been in the unit for 8 months. He was 20 years old and from Dallas, and he had the specific quality of stillness that some young soldiers develop early, the ability to watch without being noticed watching. He had been watching Maya Carter since they arrived at Outpost Keller 4 days ago. Not because she was a woman in a place with very few women, not for any reason that would embarrass him later. He watched her the way you watch something that doesn't fit the pattern and sit with that fact rather than explaining it away. She fixed weapons. That was her job. She was very good at it. In 4 days, she had repaired or corrected every rifle, every SAW, both M240s, 3 pistols, and a grenade launcher that had been jamming for 2 weeks before anyone admitted it. She did it quietly, without fanfare, and the men whose weapons she fixed took them back without thanks because she was the mechanic and that was her job. But Garza had noticed things. The way she held each weapon when she first picked it up, not just examining the mechanism, but spending a full second with it before she did anything, like a doctor placing a hand on a patient's chest before reaching for any instrument. The way she watched the ridgelines every morning through the frost on the window when she thought no one was looking. The way she clocked every exit in every room she entered, every time, without appearing to do it. And now, in the shelter, with Webb bleeding and Holloway cut and the storm outside and 40 armed men moving through it, Garza watched her assemble a plan. He was certain that was what she was doing. He was certain because of the particular quality of her stillness, it was not the stillness of someone waiting for instructions. It was the stillness of someone who had already decided. Carter, he said quietly. She looked at him. What are you thinking? She regarded him for a moment. Then she said, the thermal units they have are handheld. In a whiteout, the range drops to maybe 60 meters. They need to get close to see anything. Right. The draw is 200 meters of compressed terrain. Walls close enough to touch if you spread your arms. Their flanking advantage gone the moment they enter it. She paused. But the draw runs north-south. If someone is already in it, moving south while they move north, the thermal picture gets complicated. 2 heat signatures in a narrow space, moving toward each other. Hard to distinguish who's who. Garza was quiet for a moment. You want to be inside before they get there, he said. She did not confirm it. She looked back at the drop cloth. That is insane, he said. Possibly. 1 person against 40. 1 person who knows exactly where they're going, In conditions where 40 can't see each other. She folded the oil rag once, twice, precisely. Versus 40 who don't know the terrain, who have 3 thermal units among them, who have to stay spread wide enough to avoid friendly fire, who are walking into a choke point they think is empty. A pause. Different problem than it looks. Garza stared at her. He was 20 years old. He had been in 8 months. He had seen enough to know that some calculations were made by people who had done math the rest of the room couldn't see. "You've done this before," he said. It was not a question. She did not answer. She stood, reached for the single rifle she had kept separate from the others, an M4 she had rebuilt from components 3 days ago, balanced and tuned in ways that the factory configuration never quite achieved, and checked the chamber. "Tell Sergeant Reamer to get everyone to the north wall and wait," she said. "Anyone comes through the door who isn't me, assume hostile." She picked up 3 magazines. A combat knife she had kept clipped to the inside of her pack since day 1. She looked at Garza once. Her eyes were not dramatic. They were simply present, fully present, with a quality of attention so complete it felt almost impersonal. "Don't come after me," she said. "Absolutely not," Stokes said. "Carter, I am not sending a weapons technician alone into a kill zone against 40. "You're not sending me," she said. "I'm going." The distinction registered in the room. Reamer heard it. Holloway heard it from the floor where he was sitting with a compress against his face. Even Fitch, who had turned away from her 20 minutes ago and not looked back, turned. "You don't have the authority," Stokes began. "No," she agreed. "I don't." She looked at him, and her look was not combative or performative. It was simply direct, the way a technician looks at a broken part and tells you what it needs. "But here's what we have, sir. We have 7 people, 2 of them unable to fight. We have 1 exit that's already compromised. We have 40 enemy combatants who are going to reach this building in 20 minutes. And when they do, they're going to kill everyone in it." She paused. "And we have 1 window narrow, closing fast where the terrain works for us instead of them." Stokes stared at her. "What's your background, Carter?" Reamer asked quietly. She looked at him. "Mechanic." Before that, she did not answer. Fitch made a sound. Not a laugh, something shorter and less committed than a laugh. "She's not going to tell you, because there's nothing to tell. She's a friend." "Fitch." Holloway's voice came from the floor, quiet and final. "Shut up." "Fitch, shut up." Reamer held Maya's gaze for a moment. Something moved behind his eyes, a calculation being run, a probability being revised. He had 22 years in. He had seen the specific quality of stillness she was carrying, had learned long ago what it meant and where it came from. He looked at Stokes. Stokes understood the look. He looked back at Maya and did something that took more discipline than any tactical decision he had made in his career. He stepped aside. "Rules of engagement are clear," he said, quietly, as though to himself. "They are?" she said. She pulled on her cold weather outer layer. Checked the magazine, seated, confirmed, knife clipped and accessible. She moved toward the north door, the one that opened onto the side of the ridge away from the current fire. She stopped, looked back at the room. 7 people looking at her. Webb on the floor, with a field dressing on his shoulder. Holloway against the wall. Fitch, for once, with nothing to say. Briggs, holding his rifle with both hands. Garza, watching her with the specific stillness he had been carrying all evening. Reamer, with his arms folded and his jaw set. Stokes. She said nothing. She pulled the door open and stepped into the storm. The world outside was white and absolute. Not the white of clean surfaces. The white of erasure. The wind moved in horizontal sheets, driving ice crystals that were beyond mere snow. Each one a small, precise instrument of cold that found every exposed surface and registered there. Temperature well below the point where the body begins its triage, deciding what it can afford to maintain and what it must sacrifice. Maya moved. She did not run. Running in these conditions was noise and disruption, and the opposite of invisible. She moved in the deliberate, energy-conserving pattern she had learned in environments that were different in geography but identical in principle, quiet, controlled, leaving no gap between decision and action. The North Ridge approach to the draw was 400 meters of broken terrain boulders, ice-covered rock faces, 2 dry creek beds that were currently anything but dry. She knew the route because she had studied it the way she studied everything, not for any particular purpose at the time, but because the habit of understanding terrain was so old and so foundational that doing otherwise felt like walking into a room without noting the exits. She entered the upper draw at 1,812 hours. The rock walls rose on both sides, 3 meters, 4, closing to perhaps 2 meters of passage at the narrowest point. The wind here was different, channeled, directed, louder in its specific corridor. It covered sound the way darkness covers movement, transforming the narrow passage into something acoustically strange, a place where distance was unreliable, where sound arrived from unexpected angles, where the geography did half the work. She pressed her back against the eastern wall and let the cold of the rock register through her outer layer. Stood perfectly still. Let herself become, as much as possible, a variation in the stone. Listened. 40 feet of elevation below her. Through the white, something moved. Not sound exactly. Pressure. The specific change in the atmosphere that a large body of people creates even in a storm, even in silence. The way air thickens slightly ahead of them, as though the weather itself becomes aware of the weight it is carrying. She had felt this before, in other draws, in other storms, in other mountains that were different in name and identical in principle. She counted, not people, time, rhythm. The pattern of a unit moving in tactical formation, staggered, spaced, controlled. The spacing between footfalls told her about the terrain they were navigating, the careful, deliberate placement of feet on uncertain ground in zero visibility. The intervals between position changes told her about the communication structure, which elements were checking in with which, how information moved through the formation. Professional. These were not conscripts moving through a mountain pass on adrenaline and hope. These were trained men moving in a pattern that someone had drilled into them until it became automatic, which meant they were predictable. Training produces consistency, and consistency, in a kill zone, is a liability. She noted all of it, filed it, checked the magazine in the M4 one final time, felt the familiar geometry of it under her fingers, the curved steel, the weight of the loaded rounds, the seating of it against the lower receiver, and moved down toward them. The first contact came at the third bend. He was on point, the lead man, moving ahead of the main formation by 30 meters, doing the job that nobody wanted and that the best soldiers in any unit always did anyway. She saw him before he saw her, which was the only margin that mattered. He materialized from the white as a shape, then a geometry, then a specific configuration of equipment and posture and movement that she read in the time it takes to exhale. She had learned, a long time ago, to make the decision before the moment, not during it. During the moment, there was only execution. Single shot. The sound was swallowed immediately by the storm, not suppressed in the mechanical sense, but suppressed by the weather itself, the wind and snow and ambient noise of a mountain in extremis converting the report into just another element of the chaos. In the pass, sound behaved strangely anyway. Echo was unreliable. Distance was misrepresented. He went down without falling, the specific controlled descent of a man whose body had received a message it couldn't override, settling rather than collapsing, the snow receiving him the way snow receives everything. The storm covered him in the time it takes to exhale twice. She was already moving before he hit the ground. The second and third contacts were together a two-man element covering the flanks, moving parallel to the main body 5 meters off the pass wall. In the whiteout, they were visible to her as shapes in the gray, marginally warmer than the rock, distinguishable only because she was looking for the specific geometry of a human form and they were not yet looking for her. 2 shots. Spacing. 4 seconds. Both down. She moved north again, repositioning before the main body could process what the loss of communication from the flanking element meant. In this visibility, they would need time to confirm, time to find each other, time to understand the silence that was spreading through their formation. She gave them none. The radio in the shelter crackled at 1,831 hours. Not transmission reception. A fragment of enemy communication on an open channel, not encrypted, someone speaking quickly in a language that Reamer understood well enough. He turned to Stokes. "They're reporting contact," he said. He listened. His face did not change expression in the way that faces change expression when the news is neutral. They're saying they can't locate the shooter. They can't. He stopped. Static. Then a different voice. Shorter. More urgent. They lost their point element, Reamer said quietly. And both flank scouts. Garza looked at the door Maya had gone through. How long has she been out there? Briggs asked. 19 minutes, Garza said. No one had anything to add to that. At 1,847 hours, the enemy radio went quiet. Not quiet in the way of changed frequencies or encrypted communication. Quiet in the specific and final way of a communications network that no longer has enough nodes to sustain itself, where the gaps between check-ins grow and then the check-ins stop, and the silence that follows is not a choice, but an outcome. In the shelter, they heard it happen, or rather, they heard the last fragments before it happened. A voice calm, controlled. The kind of calm that costs something, reporting a second contact. Down. Clean. No ID on the shooter's position. Moving again. Another voice. Shorter. 2 words that Reamer translated without inflection. Confirmed down. Then another gap. Longer. Then a voice that was no longer calm. Stokes was standing at the map table. He had not moved in 20 minutes. He was looking at the contour lines of the draw with an expression that had moved through several phases and arrived somewhere still. How many did she say? Briggs asked. She didn't say anything. Garza was at the north window, face close to the frost-covered glass, seeing nothing but white. She just went. How many are we at? Remir was monitoring the radio fragments, counting. Based on the contact reports, he paused, counted again. 14 confirmed, maybe 16. The reports are getting sparse. In 35 minutes, Holloway said from the floor. Nobody confirmed it. The number was in the room anyway. Outside, the storm had reached its maximum intensity. Visibility was functionally 0 beyond 20 meters. The temperature had dropped to the point where the shelter's heating unit was running continuously and still not keeping pace. Ice was forming on the inside of the windows. Fitch had not spoken in 40 minutes. He was sitting in the same chair he had been sitting in when the evening began. In the same position, rifle across his knees, looking at the floor between his boots. He had the specific appearance of a man who has been required to revise a fundamental assumption and has not yet found the language to process the revision. At 1,903 hours, the enemy radio transmissions stopped entirely. That's Reamer started. Don't, Stokes said. They waited. The wind, the heating unit, Webb's careful, controlled breathing from the floor. At 1,911 hours, a sound at the north door. Every rifle in the room came up simultaneously, instantly. The specific choreography of people who have been waiting so long that the waiting has become its own kind of pressure. The door opened. She was covered in snow, white to the shoulders, ice crystals in her hair, the cold so deep in her clothes that when she stepped into the shelter, the warmth didn't reach her for a full minute. She set the M4 down on the drop cloth, checked the chamber, cleared it, set it down with the same care she gave every weapon. She looked at the room, 7 people looking back at her. Nobody spoke. She reached for the oil rag in her back pocket and wiped her hands. The oil and the cold didn't mix well. The rag dragged across her fingers and left them looking exactly as they had looked when Fitch had made his first comment 8 hours ago. Black at the knuckles. Engine stained. Permanently, irreducibly mechanical. "Draw is clear," she said. The words were too small for the silence they fell into. Stokes found his voice first. "How many?" "All of them," she said it flatly. Not as a boast. The way you'd say the repair is complete. The equipment is operational. The job is done. A status report. Reamer's jaw moved. He looked at Stokes. Something passed between them that did not require language. Fitch looked up from the floor. He looked at Maya at her hands, specifically at the oil rag she was still holding, at the rifle on the drop cloth, at her face, and the expression that crossed his was not the complex, prepared expression of a man who has decided to be humble. It was simpler than that. It was the expression of a man from whom something has been taken that he cannot get back, and who is not yet sure whether to grieve it or not. He said nothing. Garza crossed the room. He stopped a meter from her. He was 20 years old and he had been watching her all evening, and he had the particular look of someone whose calculation had been confirmed, though the confirmation brought no satisfaction with it. "Are you hit?" he asked. She looked at her hands. Her arms. "No." "Cold?" He nodded. He went to get the thermal blanket from the emergency kit. That was all. No more questions. By 0200, the storm had begun to break. The way mountain storms break not gradually but in sections, the wind dying in patches, visibility returning in corridors between the remaining snow. The first stars appeared over the eastern ridge at 0215, which none of them had expected to see that night. Lieutenant Stokes organized the casualty status. Webb's shoulder would need surgery, but he was stable. Holloway's lacerations were sealed and his hand was functional. The others were cold and exhausted and operational. He sent the first radio transmission when the frequency cleared at 0240. The reply came in 8 minutes: confirmation of position, weather assessment, preliminary ETA for extraction, 0800, weather permitting. He relayed the information to the team. Then, he went to where Maya was sitting, back in her corner, back against the wall, the M240 in her lap that she had quietly resumed examining, because the gas system had been exposed to extreme cold, and she wanted to check the tolerances. He stood over her for a moment. She looked up. "I need to ask you something," he said. She waited. "Your file." He chose his words. "Your service record. Before the mechanic assignment." She looked back at the weapon. "It's sparse," he said, "redacted in ways that—" He paused. "Specific ways." She ran the charging handle through its travel. "Carter. I fixed weapons," she said. "That's my MOS." He stood there for another moment. Then he sat down across from her, elbows on his knees, and spoke quietly enough that only she could hear it. "In 21 years of service," he said, "I have been in a lot of bad positions, and I have seen a lot of people work their way out of them." He paused. "What happened in that draw tonight, the execution, the positioning, the management of a multi-target environment in zero visibility conditions, that is not something that comes from natural talent." He looked at her. "That is something that is trained, specifically, over years, in a specific program." She did not confirm or deny. "I'm not asking for documentation," he said. "I'm not asking for anything that goes in a report. I'm asking because those 7 people in this room are alive because of what you know how to do, and I want to understand what I'm looking at." Long pause. The heating unit ran. Somewhere outside, the wind made a final attempt and gave up. Maya ran a cloth through the barrel of the M240 and held it to the light, checking the bore. "I used to be something else," she said. Not reluctantly, just precisely, like a measurement, for a while. "What happened?" She set the weapon down, looked at her hands. "My team didn't come home," she said. That was all. It was enough. She had been 26 years old when they read her into the program. The program had no formal name that was used in speech. It had a designation, a letter number combination that appeared in budget documents in a subcategory that itself appeared in a larger budget category that was labeled with a name that was technically accurate but described a function roughly 3 levels of abstraction removed from what was actually occurring. This was by design. She had been selected from a marksmanship program, which had itself drawn from a conventional unit, which had itself drawn from a civilian life in rural Pennsylvania, where she had grown up shooting with her grandfather on property that backed up to state forest land. Her grandfather had been a patient and deliberate teacher. He had taught her that the act of firing was the last step, and almost the least important one, that the work was in everything before the trigger, in the reading of conditions, and the holding of stillness, and the understanding of distance. She had taken that lesson further than he had ever intended. The program trained her for 2 years. Environments, advanced, urban, high altitude, maritime, cold weather operations, specifically a 3-month module that had taken her to locations she was not permitted to identify even in retrospect, in conditions that made Outpost Keller feel temperate. She ran 17 missions. The first 15 went as planned. The 16th went as planned. The 17th did not. She had never discussed the 17th mission with anyone who had not been there. The people who had been there were 4, and she was the only one who remained. And this was the fact that she carried not like a wound, exactly, because wounds healed, and this had not healed, and she had stopped expecting it to. She carried it the way a structure carries load, constantly, silently, as a condition of remaining upright. She had left the program 6 months after the 17th mission. The paperwork said medical separation, a box checked in a category that covered a range of outcomes that were all technically true and none of them sufficient. She had not fought the paperwork. She had signed where they told her to sign and walked out of a building in a city she was not permitted to name and driven to a city she had chosen, specifically because she had no prior connection to it. She had slept for 3 days. She had eaten badly for 2 weeks. She had run 6 miles a day, every day, for reasons she did not examine. She had retrained as a weapons technician. It was not a disguise, exactly. It was more accurate than that. She was a weapons technician. She understood weapons at a level that most armorers did not. Because her relationship with weapons was not primarily mechanical, but functional. She had used them in conditions that revealed what mattered and what didn't, what held and what failed, what could be pushed and what couldn't. The mechanical knowledge was downstream of that. She fixed weapons because she understood them. And she understood them because she had learned what it meant for a weapon to fail at the moment when failure was everything. She took the forward deployment assignments because they were available, and because she was good at her job, and because she acknowledged this without judgment. The forward positions were the ones where she was most able to be, useful in ways that the role of weapons technician did not fully describe. She had never planned to use those other skills again. She had not promised herself that she wouldn't. She understood the difference between a decision and a circumstance. Tonight had been a circumstance. She looked at her hands. The oil in the creases of her knuckles was the same oil it had always been. Engine oil, solvent, the residue of maintenance work done close and carefully. Nothing about tonight had changed the fundamental nature of her hands. That was the thing about the particular kind of work she had done in the draw. It left no mark. No evidence on the body, no disruption of the surface. You walked in, you walked out, and your hands looked exactly the same as they had looked before. The weapons you fixed bore the marks of the work scratches, wear patterns, the evidence of disassembly and reassembly, but the hands that fixed them did not. They just accumulated more oil. She had always thought that was wrong, that there should be some register, some visible accounting, that the body should carry the evidence of what it had done the way wood carries the record of years in its rings. That a person who had done what she had done should look different afterward, should be visibly changed, should carry some external evidence of the internal mass. But it didn't work that way. The body was inscrutable. The hands kept their secrets. She wiped her hands on the oil rag. At 0600, the sun came up over the eastern ridge and turned the snow into something that did not have adequate language. Garza stood in the shelter doorway and looked at it. The draw was visible from here, a gash in the mountain's face, 200 meters of compressed white terrain between walls of gray rock. From this distance, in this light, it looked like nothing. It looked like geography. He stood there for a long time. Inside, the team was doing the disciplined, practical work of people who have survived something and know that survival requires its own maintenance. Webb was sitting up, shoulder redressed, eating from a ration pack with his good hand. Holloway was running a function check on his rifle, the lacerations on his face striped with butterfly closures. Briggs was inventorying ammunition, not a task that required much time, given how little had been expended from inside the shelter. Remir was on the radio. The frequency was clear, the transmission clean, the relay station responding. The extraction window was confirmed. Fitch was helping Reamer. He had been helping Reamer since 0400. He had not sought out Maya to speak to her, had not manufactured a moment, had not cleared his throat in the self-conscious way of a man rehearsing an apology. He had simply, quietly, begun doing the things that needed doing, making coffee, inventorying gear, helping Reamer with the radio, working in the methodical, eyes-down way of a man who has nothing to say and has decided that action is a better language anyway. Maya was in her corner. She was cleaning the M4 she had carried into the draw, not because it needed cleaning the cold weather lubricant she had applied before departure had held. The mechanism was clean, the tolerances were within spec, but because the routine of it was its own thing. The reassurance of a process with clear steps, clear outcomes, clear measures of completion. She heard the helicopter at 0752. The sound came from the southeast, over the ridge, growing from a vibration to something audible to something that filled the shelter with the specific promise of departure. Lieutenant Stokes stood up. 5 minutes, Reamer called from the radio. Stokes looked at Maya. She was seating the upper receiver on the M4, running the function check, setting it down. The motion was identical to what it had been 8 hours ago, and 12 hours ago, and every time before that. He crossed to her. Crouched. "When we get back," he said. She looked at him. "I'm going to need to write a report. And in that report," he paused. Considered. "There are things that I don't know how to accurately describe. The engagement in the draw, specifically." He held her gaze. "I would like to describe it accurately, but I need to understand what I'm describing." She looked at the M4 on the drop cloth. "Write what you saw," she said. "You don't need what you don't know." Carter. "Write what happened." A single combatant used terrain and weather conditions to neutralize an enemy element of superior numbers. The combatant exploited compromised visibility and choke point geometry. She paused. "That's accurate. That's sufficient." He looked at her for a long moment. "You could come back," he said. "Whatever the circumstances were before, whatever the program was, with what you demonstrated tonight, they would." "No." She said it without emphasis or edge. Simply no. The way you say no to a measurement that doesn't fit. A part that won't seat. A tolerance that's been exceeded. He nodded slowly. He stood. "For what it's worth," he said, "I'm glad you were here." She picked up the oil rag. She pressed it once against the back of her right hand, a gesture so habitual she was probably unaware of it. The rag left the familiar dark streak. She looked at it. "I know," she said. The helicopter came in from the south and landed on the flat section of ridge, 60 meters north of the shelter. The rotor washed through snow in every direction. A private storm in the wake of the departing storm, and the team moved through it in the specific organized way of people loading out of a position they do not expect to return to. Webb went first, supported by Briggs, then Holloway, then Stokes and Reamer with the critical equipment, Garza, Fitch. Maya went last. She stood in the shelter doorway for a moment. The drop cloth on the floor, the work light she had dragged to the side wall, still on, casting its pale circle on the concrete. The folding table where Holloway and Fitch had sat 8 hours ago, playing cards and watching the weather screen flicker. She turned the work light off. She walked to the helicopter. Fitch was seated across from the door. He watched her climb in. He watched her settle into the seat and strap in. He watched her look out the window at the ridge and the draw below it, at the compressed white terrain between the rock walls, at the geography of what had happened. He watched her not look away from it. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "Carter," he said. She turned. He held her gaze. The helicopter shook with the torque of liftoff, the skids leaving the ground, the ridge falling away below them. He said, "I was wrong." 3 words. Flat, direct, without decoration. The way you say a measurement that embarrasses you but is correct. She looked at him for a moment. Then she looked back out the window. "You were scared," she said. "There's a difference." He sat with that. Outside, the mountains moved beneath them, white and immense and utterly indifferent, and the draw was just a shadow now, a crease in the rock, the last visible evidence of a night that had resolved without resolution, without ceremony or transformation, without the clean moral arc that circumstances of this weight were supposed to produce. 40 men had gone into the mountain and become part of the mountain. 1 woman had gone in after them and come back out. Her hands were still greasy. That was the whole story, and it was enough. Garza watched her the whole flight back, not suspiciously, not romantically, with the specific attention of someone who has witnessed something they will spend a long time trying to understand and will never entirely succeed. He had seen things in his 8 months that he had expected to see, and he had seen things he had not expected to see. And the woman across from him had reorganized both categories in a single evening. He thought about what she had said in the shelter, before she walked out into the storm. "Don't come after me." 4 words, no inflection, no performance. Just the flat statement of a person who understood exactly what they were walking into and had calculated that company would be a liability. He thought about her question, who still has ammunition, and how the room had heard it as a practical inquiry and he had heard it as a blueprint being assembled in real time. He thought about her hands, the oil rag. The way the oil stayed no matter how many times she wiped, as though it was not a surface condition but something deeper, an element of what she was, maintained by the daily practice of taking broken things and making them whole again. He thought about what Remer had not said when Stokes asked for her background, and what that silence meant. He looked at her now, seat back, eyes out the window, strap buckled, hands in her lap, oil-stained, and understood that she was not a mystery that resolved into a revelation. She was a mystery that remained a mystery, that had always been exactly what she appeared to be, that offered no gap between the surface and the interior, because the surface was the interior. She fixed things. She had always fixed things. The helicopter crested the last ridge, and the forward operating base appeared below them, a geometry of walls and lights and movement that meant resupply and medical care and hot food, and the particular relief of a structure between yourself and the open air. Maya did not change expression when she saw it. She looked at it the way she looked at everything fully, without performance, noting what was there. Then she looked at her hands. The oil rag was still in her right hand. She had been holding it since the shelter. She folded it, tucked it back into her rear pocket. The helicopter descended. She did not speak again. The report Lieutenant Stokes filed 12 hours later was 4 pages long. 3.5 pages described the enemy engagement, the communications failure, the casualty status, and the extraction. The final half page addressed the neutralization of the hostile element in the draw. It read, in full, "Single combatant exploited terrain and weather to neutralize a superior force using precision fire and positional advantage. Combatant sustained no casualties. Engagement lasted approximately 60 minutes. All hostile contacts confirmed down upon team arrival at engagement site." He read it over once. Considered adding more. Reconsidered. Then he filed it. Some things were accurate enough. Some truths needed no decoration. The mountain had been there. The storm had been there. The draw had been there. And Maya Carter had walked into all 3 of them and come back out, with her hands still smelling like engine oil. The rest was geography.